The Kidnapped Bride. A novel by Dr. A. Ahmed. This is an intriguing story which resonates with love, courage, resilience, and sacrifice. It is about an abducted Christian bride who was stolen by Muslim invaders from South Sudan and sold as a slave in Western Sudan. It has been written in English and translated into Arabic by the author Dr. Ahmed. Copyrights. All rights are reserved. No part of this book may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written permission of the author, except by a reviewer, who may quote brief paragraphs for a review to be printed in a public newspaper, general magazine, school journal, or university article. This novel is a work of fiction, but the entire story is based on similar happenings which occurred in southern and western Sudan. All names, characters, places, and events are either the product of the author's imagination or used literary. Any resemblance to real people, living or dead, events or locales is merely coincidental. Chapter 31. The Slave Trader Haj Radwan al-Taishi. Just as Imam Abdul Razak believes that he is a descendant of the greatest Imam who ever lived on the face of the earth, Imam Muhammad Ahmad al-Mahdi, who claimed to be the awaited Mahdi of God whose coming at the end of time was predicted by the Prophet Muhammad, Haj Radwan claimed that he is descended from the descendants of the greatest Caliph Abdullah al-Taishi. The Mahdi's supporters believe that his name, the awaited Mahdi of God, used to appear written on chicken eggs, tree leaves, flowers, and roses, and on the foreheads of newborn children and faces of young animals, many years before his appearance in Sudan. Most Sudanese believe that the relationship between Imam Muhammad al-Mahdi, who is from the Danagla tribe, and Caliph Abdullah al-Taishi, from the Bagra tribe, is the same relationship that was between the Prophet Muhammad and his first successor, Abu Bakr al-Siddiq. After the British colonizers were expelled by his dervishes from Sudan in 1889, the great Imam Muhammad Ahmad al-Mahdi chose Abdullah al-Taishi as his first successor. As soon as Imam Muhammad Ahmad al-Mahdi died of typhus 6 months after the fall of Khartoum, Islamic history repeated itself when the first rightly guided caliph, Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, rebelled against the Prophet Muhammad after his death. The messenger died by eating the bone meat of a poisoned goat that was fed to him by a Jewish girl named Zainab bint al-Haris in revenge for the fact that he killed her husband and members of her family, and made her a sex slave who got raped without marriage. Then Caliph Abu Bakr al-Siddiq stole the wealth and lands of the Messenger of Allah Muhammad and refused to let Fatima al-Zahra, the Prophet's daughter, inherit her father's lands and wealth. Likewise, Caliph Abdullah al-Taishi did with the descendants of Imam Muhammad Ahmad al-Mahdi. The only difference is that Caliph Abdullah al-Taishi decided to wipe the Mahdi family members of al-Ashraf out of existence, while Caliph Abu Bakr al-Siddiq was content with stealing the Prophet's inheritance. Although Shiite Muslims believe there was a conspiracy which led to the assassination of the first caliph, they also said that he killed the Prophet's daughter, Fatima al-Zahra, by poisoning her 6 months after her father's death. Al-Taishi massacred many of the Mahdi's nobles, including their young children. Al-Taishi's dervish soldiers were the first killers to innovate the killing of infants by throwing them into the air and receiving them on the points of their swords and spears. They also produced the devilish idea of placing the child inside a huge vessel and smashing his head with a mortar pole, which was used in ancient times to crush grains and turn them into powder. This is a huge grinding bowl made of iron, steel, or wood that women in Africa used to crush grains. It is a long, fat, and heavy handle made of steel, or wood to crush grains inside the vessel. From that time in history, the saying came, in the time of dictatorship, do you think we are living in the time of the Mahdism? When Caliph Abdullah al-Taishi wiped out the noble people of Muhammad Ahmad al-Mahdi, he wanted to spread Islam throughout the world, inspired by the invasions of the rightly guided caliphs. He sent an Islamic army with mujahideen to Abyssinia, today's Ethiopia, led by al-Zaki Tamal. The success of this army led the caliph to decide to send another army of Muslim mujahideen to the United Kingdom to force Queen Victoria to convert to Islam. This is the message he sent her before he sent his Mujahideen dervish warriors to invade the United Kingdom and conquer it by the sword. To Britain's Queen Victoria. I am Abdullah al-Taishi, Caliph of Muhammad Ahmed al-Mahdi. I invite you to convert to Islam. If you want to come to me, or else I will send my forces to defeat you and bring you to me in chains. When we defeat you and convert you over and your Islam improves, I will force you to marry Yusuf Wad al-Dakin. Written and sealed by Abdullah al-Taishi, successor of Imam Muhammad Ahmed al-Mahdi. The original copy of this letter is preserved today in the Louvre Museum in London. Caliph al-Taishi threatened to force the queen of the greatest empire in the world to marry Yusuf Wad al-Dakin as punishment if she refused Islam, and did not come to him, voluntarily or unwillingly, because that man is the ugliest creation of God ever. It would be difficult to describe Yusuf Wad al-Dakin's appearance in words. He was as short as a 5-year-old child, and his head was the size of an elephant. His ears were like shields and his eyes were as small as the holes of a needle. His beard looked like an old broom, and his mustache looked like a dirty brush. He had no neck or waist. His head is square, and he looks like a hunchbacked Asian man, 2 feet tall and 90 years old. He looked like an irregular square. In his external appearance, he resembles the cartoon films of Tom and Jerry. When the cat Tom swallows a large thing in his stomach and becomes square in shape. He also resembled the creepy Hobbesian Gollum from The Lord of the Rings. He also looked like the Tasmanian Devil in Looney Tunes, or Bugs Bunny and Tweety Bird. In addition to all that, he was just a few steps away from the grave. The most interesting thing about him was his juba or galabiya, which was made of every color in the universe. His juba had 2 pockets, one of them covered the entire area of his chest, and the other covered the entire area of his back. Today his galabiya is called Ansar's Juba, and it is worn by the followers of the Mahdi and the al-Taishi to this day. There was no known explanation as to why these 2 large pockets were designed for him by the tailor. Each pocket could hold a 3-year-old toddler like what a kangaroo does with her baby and carries him in her stomach pocket. Fortunately, in the end, Queen Victoria did not have to unwillingly marry such an ugly and terrifying creature, and then a human monster born from such a union would ascend to the throne of the great British Empire. The Caliph's dervish Mujahideen, sent to defeat Queen Victoria and bring her in chains to marry Yusuf Wad al-Dakin, were unable to cross the border between Sudan and Egypt. They were crushed somewhere in northern Sudan by the British Army under Herbert Kit Skinner. These forces came to the rescue of the British governor in Khartoum, Gordon Pasha, but by then the Mahdi dervishes had captured the city and killed the governor. Kit Shanner's forces advanced to Khartoum and chased Caliph Abdullah al-Taishi out of the capital, until they captured and killed him at Dubai Karat. This crushing defeat marked the end of the Mahdiist era. However, this period of Mahdism is considered the pride of Sudan, and many like Imam Abd al-Razak and Haj Radwan forced the gullible Sudanese people to venerate and worship them because of their claim to be descendants of the awaited Mahdi and his successor, the Taishi. A few years before the rapist Imam's case became a public issue, Haj Radwan was considered among the 10 richest men in the country. However, the recent shift of labor force from the western region to the eastern region of Sudan has caused huge losses to Haj Radwan's agricultural business. Before the boom in farms in the city of Gadaref in the eastern province of Kassala, Haj Radwan could easily hire cheap labor for his farms. Most of the farm workers came from Darfur and Chad. Although these workers belonged to different tribes, they were all called Masalit. The name refers to a place in Chad called Dar Muslat. Most of the Sudanese Masalit used to live in the city of Nyala, but recently the Arab Janjaweed expelled them from it after they committed horrific massacres and mass rapes. Since Darfur is the land of the Fur tribes, Dar Muslat is the land of the Masalit. Despite the name, but not everyone called Maslati is from that region in Chad. Most of them are indigenous Sudanese, and have their own villages in the Darfur region. In the past, Haj Radwan had no difficulty recruiting Masalit to work on his farms as cheap labor. His problems began when some Masalit discovered that in the eastern Sudanese city of Gadaref, they could receive higher wages for doing the same work they did for Haj Radwan every year. Every worker who went to Gadaref town returned with extra savings and a radio in hand. Radio is considered a luxury for these workers. Every entertainer loves to have a radio. A common phenomenon in the city of Gadaref is seeing 10 Masalit men sitting at the same table in an open coffee hut, each with his own radio, the antenna extended to the sky, and the sound level turned up to the maximum. When other Masalit saw luxury goods in the hands of these workers who went to Gadaref and returned after the harvest season ended, they decided that the rich city in eastern Sudan would be their preferred destination in the future. Therefore, Haj Radwan's agricultural business began to suffer more losses every year. He tried different methods to solve the problem, but all his efforts failed. When all tricks to attract cheap labor failed, Haj Radwan al-Taishi resorted to the old Islamic system of armed invasion and slavery. He began organizing armed Janjaweed militiamen, raiding Dinka villages in South Sudan, and invading refugee camps in the cities of Baba Nusa and Al-Mujlad. Other farmers resorted to the same means to obtain free workers. The civil war in the south forced millions of Southerners to flee their cities and villages, come to the western region, and join refugee camps. Haj Radwan al-Taishi and other Arab Janjaweed farmers began attacking those camps, which sparked terror in the hearts of the defenseless refugees. Because of these raids and the lack of security in those camps, many refugees fled in search of safe shelter in the western region. The only free and safe shelters available to them are Arab farms. The farmers would promise to protect them and provide them with free food and shelter in exchange for their free or low-paid labor. Due to the lack of security, the United Nations decided in 1991 to close the refugee camps in the cities of Baba Nusa and Al-Mujlad. Another important reason for their closure was the large amount of money that the Khartoum government was receiving from the United Nations in exchange for the lands on which these camps were built. When the camps were closed, the poor refugees were left homeless. Through raids, Haj Radwan and other Janjaweed invaders prefer to capture young women. These girls would then be taken to the farms and forced to work and live there until their death freed them from the slavery of their Arab masters. The Arab Janjaweed do not like to choose adult men as slaves because they may escape the plantations and return to their villages in the south, or join the SPLA rebels led by John Green. Women are slow workers and produce less than Masalit men. Therefore, the problem of Haj Radwan al-Taishi has not been completely resolved through raids on Dinka villages and refugee camps, and the recent increase in attacks by Hambata bandits on the highway has contributed to the exacerbation of the problem. After escaping alive from Malwal and Olivia in South Sudan, the evil slave trader Haj Radwan al-Taishi returned to El Fasher city and began a desperate search for more workers. He changed his previous policy and promised to increase workers' wages. He announced in many cities that he could pay more wages and provide better working conditions for his workers. Those promises and changes have attracted some people to his farms. Haj Radwan Satan al-Taishi owns farms in the provinces of Kordofan and Darfur in the western region of Sudan. In Kordofan, peanuts are grown, and in Darfur, tobacco is grown, from which Sudanese snuff is made. By the way, these peanuts are called by the Arabs as Fazdak al-Abaid, which means nigger beans, as we saw previously, like the huge fruit of Dalaba, which they call Mangat al-Abaid or the mango of slaves. Sudanese snuff is considered an internationally illegal drug, like marijuana or hashish, but in Sudan it is treated as a type of tobacco, like cigarettes or shishal, and its use is permitted. It is the most consumed type of tobacco in the country. Whoever consumes this type of tobacco snuff feels as if he is numb like a stone, and he emits a very unpleasant smell, as if he is farting and defecating from his mouth when he speaks. Prolonged use of this Sudanese snuff can cause cancer of the lips or tongue. Most workers prefer to avoid working on the snuff farms, and instead lock themselves into working on the peanut farms. This is a problem for which Haj Radwan did not find a solution. Therefore, he forces the southern girls he steals every year from Dinka villages to grow and harvest snuff on his farms. When snuff trees are planted, there is no serious problem facing plantations workers. The problem begins when the trees become mature and ready to harvest. The first step is to pluck the leaves or clap the snuff trees. The second step is to dry them under the hot African sun. The third step is to collect them into piles. The fourth step is to grind them into powder. The fifth step is to pour the powder into bags. The sixth and last step is to carry those bags and ship them in trucks. These 6 steps are called the planting and harvesting period, which takes the longest time in the process of growing tobacco leaves to make snuff. During this extended period, the poor African workers or southern Sudanese slave girls go through the most painful and dangerous experiences of their lives. Illnesses from exposure to snuff include coughing, sneezing, crying, drowsiness, choking, vomiting, fainting, sedation, and nausea. In addition, some serious lung diseases such as tuberculosis and cancer are quite common among snuff workers. For this reason, any ordinary worker would rather become a baramiloman than a snuff farmer. Only slaves, who had no choice, could be forced to do such dangerous work against their will under threat of death if they refused or attempted to escape from these hellish slave plantations. Chapter 32. The Thug Woman, Bint al-Maknamr. The lovers, Mawal and Olivia, searched all over the western region of the country for the missing Dinka bride, Ayan, until they were finally led to look for her in the slave farms of Haj Radwan al-Taishi and the refugee camp in the city of Babanusa. They divided the challenging task between them. Mawal decides to go to the slave plantations and Olivia to the refugee camps. The two lovers separated from each other at the railway station in the city of El Fasher, where Olivia boarded the train and headed to the refugee camps in the city of Babanusa in the Kordofan region, and Mawal traveled to the slave farms in the Darfur region. Before they said goodbye to each other, they prayed to God for protection and success, hoping that they would succeed in these 2 dangerous missions, and that they would meet again in the city of El Fasher in the hotel where they were staying as husband and wife. Although they are not married and have not had sex together, they falsely claimed that they are married because the law does not allow a man and a woman to stay together in a hotel without being married. On that day, the brave Azanda girl, Olivia, boarded her train and headed to the refugee camp in the city of Babanusa. She heard a lot of terrifying stories about the refugee camp in that city. Only her unwavering love for her Dinka friend drove her to risk such a dangerous journey to a place that resembled a death concentration camp. Olivia heard from reliable sources that the Islamic militiamen of the Arab Jihad regularly stage raids on the camp and force the poor refugees to flee for their lives. Even the local Muslim citizens of the city harbor a deep-seated and unjustified hatred towards the Christian refugees from South Sudan, and have tried several times to force the government to close the refugee camp that was established near their city. Citizens seem to envy the Southerners for the free food and medicine they received from the United Nations in the refugee camp. The so-called Sudanese Arabs believe that everything related to the jingo is halal or permissible for them. For this reason, they believe they have divine rights to do anything for the Jango people without feeling guilty or violating the country's civil or religious laws. The phrase Jango means an uncivilized, inhuman person. It is also a term used by the so-called black Arabs of Sudan to refer to any other Sudanese person who believes that he is non-Arab, even if he is a Muslim like them. It is a word loaded with racism, and is used to describe the southern tribes and many other African tribes that have lived in Sudan since time immemorial. Therefore, the Jango also include the Sudanese African Muslim tribes such as the Fur, Zaghawa, Masalit, and Nuba, in addition to the southern Christian tribes such as the Dinka, Nuer, and Shilluk. Arab Muslims throughout the country also believe that all things of the Jango are permissible for them. In other words, they believe that the Jingo man's cows, other livestock, women, children, and any other things belonging to him can be taken from him by force after he is killed. Of course, Sudanese law prohibits such practices, but in practice, these racist crimes occur in broad daylight, and before the eyes of law enforcement officers, as proven by United Nations reports on the actions of the Arab Janjaweed in the Darfur region. The majority of the Janjaweed are Arabs from the Misriya, Rizgat, and Bagra tribes. Olivia arrived in the city of Baba Nusa, after an incredibly stressful journey, on a crowded passenger train. She booked herself into a decent hotel as a foreign Christian correspondent for the United Nations, delegated from Uganda to conduct research on the conditions of southern refugees in Sudan. If she had not claimed to be a United Nations employee, she would not have been allowed to stay alone in a hotel room without her husband, father, brother, or grandfather, even though she is a Christian and wearing a cross around her neck. Olivia then rested for a day before visiting the southern Christian refugee camp. When she arrived at the camp, she was shocked by the substantial number of refugees. She realized that she might need a month to inspect all the refugee tents, into which poor Southerners were crammed like chickens in cages on farms or sardines in cans. However, her first day's experience proved her wrong, and from that day on, she no longer needed to return to the death concentration camp euphemistically called refugee camp. It so happened that after the Azanda girl spent just a few hours moving from tent to tent and talking with refugee women from the Dinka, Shilluk, and Nuer tribes, the Muslim Janjaweed raid took place before her eyes. The raiders covered their faces with black turbans called kadmul, like those niqabs worn by Muslim women who considered it taboo to reveal their faces. They are all heavily armed and organized like militiamen. The Khartoum government armed all the Arab Janjaweed tribes and organized them into local militias, under the pretext of protecting themselves from a possible attack by the southern rebels of the Sudan People's Liberation Army SPLA and the FAR rebels. In this way, they placed weapons in their hands to help them commit genocide against other African tribes who had no firearms other than bladed white weapons such as swords, spears, axes, and knives. This is what happened recently in the western region of Sudan, which caused the United Nations to accuse the Muslim government of violating human rights. As a trained rebel soldier, Olivia knows how to escape an attack by armed Arab Janjaweed militias. She ran for her life, leaving behind a refugee camp that was raided. During her miraculous escape, she witnessed with her own eyes the killing of many innocent Christian refugees. Those who were strong and capable, like her, made it out of the burning camp. They have nowhere to run, except the police station. The Muslim raiders followed them to the police station and shot many of them on the way, leaving them dead like wild animals that had been hunted and killed. At the police station, poor refugees sought protection and safety. The policemen, themselves Arab Muslims, reluctantly placed them in some huts that are usually used as detention rooms to house suspects and criminals. Olivia happened to be one of those lucky Southerners who found favor in the eyes of the Arab policemen. She pretends to be a foreign correspondent from Uganda sent by the United Nations to visit the refugee camp in the city of Baba Nusa, and is thus allowed to stay inside the main police station office until a police car can smuggle her out and take her back to her hotel. In the huts of the police station, the Christian refugees believe they were finally in safe hands. They are tired of their ordeal and their miraculous escape from the killing machine of the Muslim raiders. Many of them rested and some even slept. As the sun set, thousands of Arab Muslim residents of the city of Baba Nusa gathered and surrounded the police station, demanding the release of the infidel Christian southern refugees and their expulsion from their city. They threatened to burn the police station if their demands were not met. The police rejected these demands and ordered citizens to disperse. While the policemen and citizens were having a heated debate over the fate of the Christian detainees, one of the Muslim women in the crowd proposed a devilish plan and took the initiative to implement it. She returned home and brought a bucket full of kerosene, poured it on one of the confinement huts, and set it on fire. Other citizens followed suit, and set fire to the rest of the huts. After that, the Arab citizens killed any African refugees who tried to escape from the fire. On that fateful evening, the Azanda girl Olivia witnessed the most horrific genocide she had ever seen. She had never witnessed such carnage during her time fighting as a rebel in the jungle in South Sudan. She witnessed children, women, and the elderly being burned alive by fires in detention huts. While the slaughter and burning of innocent southern Christian refugees continues, a police car smuggles Olivia and some other foreign correspondents out of the police station and takes them to their hotels in various parts of the city. On that fateful day, even the Arab Muslim policemen were forced to flee for their lives, while some of them remained and joined the citizens in the horrific massacre. That same evening, the Azanda girl and the other foreign correspondents hired a few taxis at the hotel, escaped the death concentration camp, and fled to another large city called El Abayad. They are afraid to spend another hour in the hotel for fear that angry Muslim citizens will attack and slaughter them in their rooms at night. As for the woman with the satanic idea, she received great honor in the city of Babanusa, to the point that the citizens named her the daughter of King Nimr, after another great Arab hero in Sudanese history. The so-called heroic hero King Nimr had killed the son of the greatest Turkish Sultan, Ismail Pasha, and his soldiers in the same way the Muslims killed the Christian refugees inside the police huts in Babanusa city. The King Nimr and his men ambushed the Sultan, Ismail Pasha, and his soldiers and burned them alive with fire. Sudanese history recorded that King Nimr later fled from the army of Al-Daftar Dar, which came to avenge the son of the Sultan who was burned and treacherously murdered. The so-called great hero of Sudan, the devil Nimr, had fled like a coward with a few of his men to the country of Abyssinia known as Ethiopia to this day, leaving behind women, the elderly, and children to bear the consequences of his evil deed. The Turkish invaders raped Sudanese married women and young girls from the Jalia, Shakia, and Hafween tribes, and burned the rest alive with fire, and most of them drowned in the water of the Nile River, at the hands of the soldiers of the vengeful army of Al-Daftar Dar. This is the end of the story of the so-called great Sudanese hero, the fugitive King Nimr, but for the poor South Sudanese Christians, who were burned alive in police huts in the city of Babanusa by Muslim men and women, there is no one to avenge their innocent blood for the massacre and genocide started by the evil butchering thug Arab woman. From that day on, this daughter of Satan was called King Nimr's daughter, and her militia of Muslim men, women, and children who participated in the massacre were considered heroes. King Nimr's daughter was also considered a Sudanese heroine who inherited the spirit of courage from Mahira bint Aboud, the mother of the nation. Chapter 33. Searching for the missing Dinka bride on the slave farms. Malwal pretended to be a worker, and went to seek employment on the slave farms of the Arab Janjaweed leader Haj Radwan al-Taishi. He did not allow his beloved Olivia to accompany him on such a difficult and risky mission. He expected that the foreman and the workers would harass the beautiful and sexy Azanda girl, because of her extreme beauty and early age. They would definitely kill him if he said she was his wife, and tried to stop them from gang-raping her. Haj Radwan will consider him to be one of the Django, and therefore it is permissible for him to kill him, and take his wife from him. For this reason, the lover sent his beloved to search for his kidnapped bride, Ayan, in the refugee camp in the city of Babanusa, and he preferred to take a risk himself and go to search for her in the slave farms in the wilderness. After a few hours of waiting, Malwal and several other workers are crammed like sheep into a truck. The truck has no roof to protect them from the scorching sun and heat. They have no food or water, but are told that their first meals will be served to them in their huts when they reach the farms. Some workers prepared food for their long journey, which they had purchased in the city of El Fasher before leaving. Malwal happened to be one of these wise workers. Compassion led him to share some of his food with a poor southern woman, who had 5 children and nothing to eat or drink. The American groom was shocked when he learned that the woman's children were among the workers. None of them have reached the age of 10 yet. They are 3 underage girls and 2 young boys. Hajradwan al-Taishi deceived everyone he employed that year, and sent them to the tobacco farms from which snuff is made, instead of the Egyptian fava beans and Sudanese peanuts farms. Some workers discovered on their way to the farms that they were going to the snuff plantations in the Darfur region, instead of traveling of the Egyptian fava beans and Sudanese peanuts in Kordofan province. When they protested, the foreman threatened that they would leave them in the wilderness. Then they have to walk for several hours on foot to get back to the city. On their way back, they will be attacked and killed by wolves, hyenas, and the Hambata bandits. Therefore, none of them could risk this return trip to El Fasher city on foot. After a day and night of driving, the truck arrived at the farms. The southern mother of the little children said to the American groom that some workers live permanently on the farms. So Malva decides to search there for his missing bride, Ayan, and once he finds her, they must escape together from those slave plantations. His luck sent him to the first farm along the way. The truck resumed its journey as soon as a few selected workers jumped out. Malwal, along with 6 other men, 2 women, and 5 children, walked for 2 hours from where the truck dropped them off to the camp, where they were supposed to stay and work for 3 months. They are half dead, thirsty, and starving when they arrive at the Cambo, the farm camp. The Cambo camp consists of 4 huts built in the center of each farm to house the workers. 3 are for housing male workers and the 4th is for workers. 3 of these huts were fully occupied by male and workers, and the 4th did not have enough space for the new arrivals. Men, women, and children must sleep close together and unattended. In Cambo, therefore, gang rape of women is not rare. Even a girl can be raped in front of her crying mother. Sometimes, a mother may sell her child in an Islamic marriage to a grown-up man who is older than her father or grandfather. Therefore, life in these isolated agricultural huts is worse for workers or slave girls than in the brothel huts of Bint al-Zubair Pasha. Most of the workers are women and children from South Sudan, Darfur province, and the Nuba Mountains. The rest are men from the Masalit and Zakawa tribes. Malva could imagine how these poor southerners got here. At least 15 to 20 people live in each hut. There is no toilet in the Cambo camp. Workers must go into the wilderness to answer nature's call. They must relieve both urine and feces in the open just like dogs do in the streets. Most workers only shower once a month, and when it rains, they also get a free shower from nature's sky. Each worker is expected to prepare his own food, and is given some flour and dried fish. This is the diet available to workers for a full 3 months. To add variety to this daily meal, some forage for edible insects or animals in the wild. There are 2 types of animals that can be easily hunted, rabbits and mice. Mice are more readily available than rabbits. Farm workers call rats burrowing pigeons, dried fish are called kajik, and flour is called bankerpo. Kajik fish has an incredibly unpleasant smell when dried. One can smell it even if it has been cooked in the oven for 5 hours. The only way to get rid of its unpleasant smell is to eat it and swallow it in the stomach. Despite its pungent odor, kajik fish tastes particularly good. Bankerpo flour is cooked into porridge, which can be described as moist bread. It can be made from the flour of any type of grain. What transfers the grains into bankerpo flour is the added ingredient. Some leaves of a tree called carrot are dried, ground, and added to flour. It is the Sudanese name for the fruit of the acacia tree. The scientific name is Acacia Nile. It is believed that these leaves are the same material that the ancient Egyptians used to mummify the bodies of their pharaohs. Just as the carrot mummified the bodies of the pharaohs for thousands of years, the food of the Beni Carbo remains inside the stomachs of the plantation workers for an exceptionally long time. The worker will not feel the need to go to the toilet in the wilderness for an entire week. So he will suffer from severe constipation for several days. When he finally feels the need to defecate in the open, he will experience the same labor pain that a pregnant woman goes through before giving birth to her baby. Therefore, there is wisdom behind feeding Benkripo to farm workers. They are expected to work from sunrise to sunset. Kajik fish and Benkripo bread will kill their appetite and prevent them from wasting time going to the toilet, and when they feel pain during a bowel movement, they will never eat much again. When they defecate, they feel as if they are passing rocks through their buttocks out of the small openings of their rectums. They can urinate anywhere while they work but are not allowed to defecate near the plants they grow. Malwal lived the most horrific night of his life on the eve of his first day in a small hut in the Cambo camp. The howling of wolves and hyenas, the stinging of mosquitoes and other vampire insects, and the movement of scorpions and snakes, drove the sleep from his eyes. He spent the whole night sitting on his bed fighting with mosquitoes, which felt like they had sucked half his blood. Shortly before dawn, all the workers were forced out of their huts. They do not serve tea or breakfast. Breakfast is considered a luxury meal for the rich in Sudan anyway, so no one could dream of eating it on the farm. Only rich people eat breakfast in a poor country like the Democratic Republic of Satan, which euphemistically called Sudan. Before going to sleep, the workers ate Benkripo porridge and Kajik fish. When they woke up, they did not wash their faces or brush their teeth, except for the American groom Malwal. They smelled terrible as they started to emerge from the caves that resembled tombs for their mass burial. Work on the slave plantation began at 5 o'clock in the morning. The first stage of work is cutting small bushes and weeds that grow protruding or naturally. This job should be finished before the rain comes. The next step is sowing the seeds. In seed cultivation, the worker must do 3 tasks at the same time. The worker must dig a small hole with a tool he holds in his hand called a sickle, throw some seeds into the hole from a bag attached to his back, and use his foot to bury the seeds. When this stage is over, workers sometimes have a little time to rest, so the seeds can grow into bushes. Anything that has not been planted and produces seed as a sprout should be removed because it is considered a seed weed. The process of removing unwanted weeds will continue until the seeds become ripe with trees for harvest. Then follow the 6 steps we mentioned previously, one after the other. First, Haj Radwan Al-Taishi owns farms in the states of Kordofan and Darfur in the western region of Sudan. In Kordofan, Sudanese peanuts and Egyptian fava beans are grown, and in Darfur, tobacco is grown from which snuff is made. Most workers prefer to avoid working on snuff farms and prefer to work on peanut and fava bean farms. But as we mentioned earlier, the evil slave trader, Haj Radwan Al-Taishi, deceived them and sent them to snuff farms instead of peanut and fava bean farms. Because Malwal is a Sudanese American, life is exceedingly difficult for him from day one on that hellish slave plantation. He has little knowledge of the Sudanese agricultural system. For example, most workers know about a plant that grows wild called dog onion. Touching an Indian cobra or glowing embers would be less dangerous than touching one of these dangerous vegetables. Wise workers, who know that notorious dog onion, use something like gloves to cover their hands when pulling it out of the ground because it grows sticky and harmful to the crops. It is unfortunate that our American friend Malwal used his bare hands that day to dispose of dog onions. His reaction and loud scream made the other workers wonder if he had been bitten by a venomous flying snake called Abu Darga. The workers fled from Malwal to avoid a possible confrontation with the terrifying flying snake, Abu Darga, which they believe is more dangerous than the bald snake, which, according to Islamic teachings, haunts a Muslim in the grave. Malwal rolled on the ground, kicking his feet, as if he were having an epileptic seizure. After a tense pause, the workers realized that he had not been bitten by the dangerous snake, but had touched the dog's onion because he was still alive and struggling and kicking, not dead. They know that the notorious flying snake Abu Darga will not let its victim live more than a few minutes after it bites him and poisons his body. There is no medicine or treatment for dog onion except to leave its victim in pain until the burning sensation subsides on its own. As soon as the painful sensation stopped, the Sudanese-American worker wanted to return to the hut and take the rest of the day as sick leave. The foreman refused to accept this excuse and forced him to continue his work, and he had to be more careful than before. Once that day, the American groom faced many other minor natural disasters, while he cut small bushes and weeds. Nothing dangerous came his way, like dog onions, but other herbs he was also supposed to handle with caution but didn't, muhawira and hasconite. Muhawira has thorns for self-protection that it hides inside its branches. Its victim feels trouble without seeing the thorns, so there is no way he can remove the thousands of thorns that have entered his skin. The American boy could understand that God gave some plants thorns for self-defense, but Malwell wondered why God gave dogs onions with an acid that burned like fire. The bulb is hidden underground, and is not seen by humans or animals until it is taken out. So why did she need to protect herself in such a sneaky way? The hasconite plant does not have thorns or burning acid like the embers of fire, such as dog onions and muhawira, but it just likes to cling to any creature that approaches it. So, when Malwell returned to his hut, he felt like a moving sack of hasconite. On the second day, Malwell became wiser and thus escaped from many of those problematic weeds. While he was working that day, the Dinka groom, who had come from the United States to search for his missing Dinka bride, Ayan, engaged in a conversation with some southern women. He inquired about their condition and how they were brought there. Most of them lived there permanently and told their sad stories of how they were kidnapped, beaten, raped, brought as slaves, and forced to work on farms by Arab Muslim thugs. Malwell also asked them about his Dinka bride, who was kidnapped and missing for more than a year. None of the women claimed to have seen or heard of a girl with the name Ayan Majok from the Tawila village in South Sudan that Malwell mentioned. They told him that he would not be allowed to visit other farms to search for his missing wife. It is against the rules of agriculture for a worker to leave work and visit other farms. Fierce dogs and guards armed with firearms guard each farm. This information discouraged the American husband. So he started thinking about escaping the farm and returning to the city. But Malwell remained stuck on that farm for 3 days and 3 nights before the heavens performed a divine miracle and helped him escape. The day before his escape, it rained all night until the early hours of the morning. That rare luck happened before dawn when he escaped from the hut while everyone was asleep. On the morning of the 4th day, when the foreman counted his workers, the southern slave, Malwell Deng, was found missing. The foreman searched everywhere for the missing worker, and sent ferocious dogs and armed guards to track down the runaway Dinka semi-slave boy, but they were unable to find him. Chapter 34. Escape on foot through the wilderness of death. Although Malwell manages to escape the slave plantation, with the supernatural help of torrential rains, he needs something more than a miracle to return to El Fasher city. How could he return to that city? If he could escape the ravenous beasts of the wilderness, he would not be able to avoid the dangerous bandits of the Hemlata men. They are also armed robbers who are considered heroes by Sudanese society. All the people of Sudan considers their thefts and crimes to be very brave and honorable acts. Numerous novels, books, plays and television series have been written to honor their crimes, and armed robberies of camels caravans, and livestock PF shepherds. Their actions are similar to the raids of the Prophet Muhammad and those with him, the so-called Mujahideen, the first brave and holy warriors who considered their crimes to be commanded by God and praiseworthy even today. The raids of Muslim Arabs on Christian cities and villages in southern Sudan received the same status and great praise as the invasions of the alleged prophet of God and his 4 rational caliphs, and those who came after them from the Islamic kingdoms and carried out invasions of other tribes and nations and spread Islam by the sword. They invaded, plundered, pillaged, killed, raped, enslaved, and occupied in the name of God is great. During those Islamic invasions, Muslim Mujahideen killed 60 million Christians, 80 million Hindus, 10 million Buddhists, and countless numbers of Jews. Moreover, they raped, enslaved, and sold in slave markets millions of women and children of defeated men from among the so-called unclean, and defiled infidels and enemies of God and His Prophet. In any case, Islamic invasions and atrocities are huge topics, and we will return to them in future books and give them a full detailed explanation. Even if Mawul is attacked neither by wild beasts nor by human bandits, he may fall into the hands of demons on horses. The Arab Janjaweed are more dangerous than any other creature on earth. The word Janjaweed in the Darfurian language means devils on horses. They consider themselves Muslim Mujahideen, or holy warriors of our Rahman Allah, who have been given divine rights to attack the lands of infidels, conquer them, plunder them, enslave, and rape their women. For them, southern Christians and for Muslims are infidels. The Muslims of Darfur are considered infidels because they revolted against the Islamic government of Khartoum. They are treated in the same way as the Muslim Arabs who revolted against the first caliph, Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, and he considered them apostates from Islam, fought them, and killed them in horrific ways. Some were killed by the sword, some by being plunged into wells, and some were thrown from the top of the high mountains. Then their free women were raped, their property was confiscated and distributed among the Mujahideen as spoils of war, and their women and children were sold in slave markets. Once he reached a safe distance from the slave plantation, which like concentration camp of death, the escaped worker, Mawul, stopped running and began thinking about his next plan for safe escape. He has neither a firearm gun nor any local white weapon to protect himself from a possible attack by a wild beast or the Hambata bandits who are highway robbers. He does not even know the way back to El Fasher city. Everything in that part of Sudan is hostile, even nature. The heavy rain that fell last night made walking difficult for him. The wilderness is teeming with all kinds of dangerous animals and insects such as poisonous snakes, scorpions, wolves, and hyenas. Whatever happened, he vowed never to return to the concentration camp that could correctly be called the plantation of African slaves during the centuries of slavery in America. Mawul continued walking aimlessly through the rugged wilderness. He walked most of the time and only rested for short periods before resuming his journey. He hopes that his feet will guide him to a nearby village because he does not want to spend the night in the open. After a long, aimless wandering in the frightening wilderness, he found a narrow path that seemed likely to lead to a nearby village. So he left the main bumpy road and followed it for a long distance until he finally reached a small village called Hilat Naja. The Dinka boy entered the village at sunset. He felt very relieved after arriving safely. He is lucky so far because neither wild beasts nor human bandits have attacked him in the wilderness. However, if Mawul had known what would happen to that village, he would never have gone there, preferring to face the danger of the wilderness rather than the attack of the Janjaweed Arabs. The Sudanese Islamic government supports dangerous militias such as the Janjaweed, although they usually attack a village, burn it, kill its men, steal its livestock and property, rape its women, and enslave its young children. The government does not consider the Janjaweed to be outlaws or a gang of thieves. They are also neither military soldiers nor policemen. They are well-trained and highly organized militias. To justify their brutal attacks, the Janjaweed claim to be the guardians of the Darfur region from the Fur rebels and the southern rebels of the Sudan People's Liberation Army. Many of the residents of Hilat Naja village are from the Fur tribes, although the village is also inhabited by various Sudanese African tribes such as the Masalit and Zaghawa. Who are the Fur rebels? This requires some clarification to answer. In South Sudan, the rebels were a well-organized army that fought against the Sudanese army for years, until the Khartoum government was forced to sign a fragile peace treaty with them that eventually split Sudan into two separate states. But in Darfur, the rebels remain immature and poorly organized. Some groups in Darfur took up arms and rebelled against the government. While the southern rebels are Christians, the rebels in Darfur are Muslims. There are more than 80 armed rebel movements. These Muslim rebels have different demands. One group wanted to liberate Darfur from the control of Sudanese Arabs. Another group demanded justice because they believed Darfur province has been marginalized and ignored by the central government in Khartoum. They are right in this request. If someone visited one of the northern, central, and eastern provinces of Sudan, and then traveled to the region of Darfur, the Nuba Mountains, and the states of southern Sudan, he would not believe that he is still in the same country. The differences are greater than those between the First World and the Third World. For this and other reasons, the Southerners, Darfurians, and residents of the Nuba Mountains rebelled against the Arab government, took up arms, and fought for their rights. Other reasons are racial discrimination and lack of representation in the central government. Since the British left Sudan over 60 years ago until the present, no president has been elected or risen to power through a military coup from those marginalized counties mentioned above. All the leaders came from three dominant northern Arab tribes known as the Ja'aliya, the Shakiya, and the Dainagala. Since Sudan gained its independence on January 1, 1956, some southern African Christians have taken up arms and rebelled against the Khartoum government, which is dominated by Muslim Arabs. The fighting between the southern rebels and the Sudanese army was called a civil war for a long time, until the Muslim Brotherhood seized power through a military coup on June 30, 1989. The Muslim Brotherhood government turned the civil war in the south into a war of Islamic jihad against the southern Christians. It is known as the Jihad War to spread Islam and Islamize the south. Thousands of Muslims joined the war and went south to kill the so-called Christian infidels. Their main goal is the Islamization of southern Christians. The government also called for the forced conscription of young boys and sending them to fight or die as martyrs in the south. With the noble promise in the Quran that the Muslim martyr will marry 72 virgin girls in paradise, the Mujahideen prefer death to murder. Hence, the idea of a martyr's wedding was invented. When a family in the north receives the sad news, or rather good news for them, that their son has been killed as a Muslim martyr in the south, the fathers and brothers rejoice and cheer, and the mothers, sisters, and wives ululate and celebrate his marriage in heaven with the 72 virgins. What may seem like a fairy tale to a Western reader is the reality in Sudan. The Janjaweed attacks in Darfur cannot be described as a jihad war, as is the case in the south against Christian infidels, because the Janjaweed and Fur rebels are Muslims. The Janjaweed Arabs and the Fur and Nuba African tribes have fought side by side in the ranks of the Sudanese army in their jihad war in the south against the southern Christians for many years. Therefore, what divides them today is race, not religion. The Janjaweed claim that they are pure Arabs, descendants of the Arab Peninsula and Fertile Crescent, and that the other Darfur tribes are pure African Sudanese. So they despise them and call them black slaves and niggers. They also call themselves descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, and their holy book is the Quran. The Janjaweed militias were created before the Fur rebels took up arms and began attacking military bases in Darfur. They were created under the pretext of defending Darfur and preventing southern rebels from advancing into the western region of Sudan. When the Fur rebels took up arms, the government of Sudan turned the Janjaweed against the entire Sudanese African population living in Darfur. It is neither an Islamic jihad nor a civil war, but ethnic cleansing. There were many massacres, rapes, destruction, and genocide. The International Criminal Court in The Hague accused Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. An arrest warrant was issued against him on March 4, 2009, by the International Criminal Court, charging him with 5 crimes against humanity, murder, extermination, forcible transfer, torture, and rape, and 2 counts of war crimes, plunder and premeditated murder, directing attacks against civilians. The ICC later issued a second arrest warrant for President al-Bashir on July 12, 2010, adding 3 charges of genocide for the ethnic cleansing of the Fur, Masalit, and Zaghawa tribes in the Darfur region and in the Western Sudan region, but to this day, the International Criminal Court once ousted President Omar al-Bashir, and he is now being held in a prison that resembles a five-star hotel in the capital of Sudan, Khartoum City. Chapter 35. Witnessing brutal attacks and mass rape by Muslim mujahideen. The Arab Muslim Janjaweed are always looking for a simple reason to justify their brutal attack on a village or city of Sudanese Africans, then wipe it and its inhabitants out of existence. If a shot is fired from a village against a Sudanese army soldier or a Janjaweed fighter, that is reason enough to attack that village and burn it, kill all the African men in it, rape their women, and take them as war slaves. Also, if someone enters a village and is suspected of being a rebel, it will also lead to a devastating attack. Therefore, the evil Arab Janjaweed terrorists are always looking for a simple reason to justify their brutal attack on the African village of Darfur, and then wipe it and its residents out of existence. It happened on that day that our American friend Mowell, by chance or fate, found that village and decided to spend the night there, when one of the spy informants spotted him and reported him to the Janjaweed. The Arab Janjaweed consider a Darfurian rebel who enters a village every person carrying the plague or coronavirus, which will spread his contagious disease to the entire village and turn them all overnight into rebels by morning. Therefore, after being informed about the supposed African rebel Mowell, the Janjaweed Arab leaders decided to determine the devastating fate of that village and waited for the right time to attack it. They informed the Sudanese Army military air forces in the city of El Fasher and asked them to send a fighter plane, as is customary every time a deadly attack occurs. The military air force must first bomb the village all night, and then the Janjaweed can attack it at dawn. At night, the plane arrived, dropped its bombs on the village, and flew away. Mowell happened to be sleeping outdoors, a widespread practice in Sudan. He heard the plane flying over the village and saw devastating bombs dropping from the air. Fortunately, one of those bombs did not explode near him. But the bombs lit up the village and many huts caught fire. The villagers learned that the Janjaweed were on their way. Those who could run began to run for their lives, and those old men, old women, children, and disabled people who could not run waited for their inevitable death. Even young girls will not escape the burning village for fear of fleeing and falling prey to being gang-raped in the wilderness by men or attacked by beasts or bandits. Meanwhile, Mowell became confused and did not know what was happening. Instead of fleeing the village, he ran to a nearby hut and took cover. The hut is overflowing with children, women, and frightened elderly people. It seemed to him that the African men had left their families and fled. The Dinka boy tried to speak to the villagers in his language, broken Arabic or English, but none of them understood his words. The only word he heard from them and understood was Janjaweed. If they had mentioned the name of Satan himself and his demons, perhaps Mowell would not have been so afraid. While in America, he heard about the many atrocities committed by the Arab Janjaweed every day against the poor Sudanese in the Darfur region. Moreover, he saw how these horse-riding demons destroyed his village Tawila in the south, wiped out his people, and stole the girls along with his Dinka bride, Ayan. Because of this, his first reaction is to try to escape before the bad guys arrive. What a pity, it was too late, because by then, the soldiers of Ahriman or Satan's forces had already entered the village chanting Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. These two devilish words always turn them into ravenous beasts. They ride horses and cover their faces with black turbans that make them resemble Muslim women in burqas, or the demeaning Islamic niqab. Their rifles are in their hands ready to fire. Standing at the door of the hut, the African-American boy saw the Janjaweed horses entering the village. He does not know whether he will appear or retreat. The bullets fired at him forced him to return to the hut of terrified villagers. Children and women started screaming. Suddenly the hut caught fire. The fire forced Mowell and the poor villagers from the spot to come out of the hut and face the demons in horses called Janjaweed, who show no mercy to any human or animal. Then they showered them all with deadly bullets. Malwal saw many women, children, and elderly people falling dead before his eyes. So he knelt down and prostrated himself, wishing he had a gun to kill at least one of these murderous Arab devils before they killed him. While he was lying on his stomach and waiting for his death, Malwal saw some masked knights like Muslim women approaching the rest of the people. Someone ordered the frightened girls to separate themselves from the rest. When the African girls stepped aside, the cowardly Arab knights opened fire on the young children, the old men, and the old women, killing them all as they thought. Malwal pretended to be dead. He was counted from the list of dead corpses, and thus his life was temporarily saved. After that, the Arab Janjaweed leader ordered the distribution of young African women and unmarried girls as jawari or slaves to the Mujahideen Muslim invaders. However, to ask for mercy and struggle for their purity and virginity, the unmarried girls began to cry. Despite their tears and pleadings, young for women and virgin girls were separated from their mothers and grandmothers. Then the leader, Satan incarnate, authorized his men, the Muslim Mujahideen, to search and plunder the remaining property and wealth of the African people of the village buried under the rubble. While some Arab Janjaweed fighters were looting the burned huts, Malwal saw with his own eyes that other Muslim invaders began raping frightened young women and underage girls. The scene of gang rape is so horrific and pure evil that the African-American groom could not believe his eyes that these people who are doing such evils to these innocent young women and frightened underage children are human beings like him. He never expected that one day he would see men so devoid of any human feelings and become like savages of the forest. How could a man feel sexual desire for a 9-year-old child and mercilessly tear apart her tiny genitals until his victim's blood covered his underwear and stained his large penis? Even savages and barbarians might not do this to the underage women of their defeated enemies. Moreover, even animals do not have sex with their young animals. Malwal realizes that if he does not escape immediately, he will never be able to be freed, and soon he will be discovered alive and mercilessly shot and killed like they did to the others. So he slowly crawled on the ground until he reached a horse. He is a well-trained rebel soldier who excels and knows how to evade the enemy. It is possible that the Janjaweed men who owned that horse discovered whether his paradise of 72 virgins in the zodiac sky had become real on earth that fateful morning. While the mass rapes were going on, the former Southern rebel found a machine gun lying near the horse. Being a former rebel and a trained soldier, he decided to shoot his way out of that hellish village. He knew that his escape would require a lot of risk, but he had no other choice. He quickly stood up and jumped on the horse's back. Immediately, his machine gun began firing at the brutal Muslim invaders engaged in their evil deeds of mass rape. When the horse left the village like a missile, Malwal killed many of them and escaped unharmed. The Janjaweed were taken by surprise, and for fear of being shot and killed, no one dared pursue the fleeing rebel African men. They still have plenty of treasure to steal, and there are more underage virgin girls to rape and children to enslave.